I'm thrilled to introduce our presenter today, Colton. Colton is the product manager for inventory and purchasing at Restaurant 365. Growing up in West Texas, he spent 13 years managing high volume casual dining restaurants across both front of house and back of house operations, including traveling throughout Texas to open new locations. Colton began his R365 career as an implementation specialist for operations tools before moving into product management. He's passionate about helping restaurants save time and money through innovative technology solutions. And when he's not working, he enjoys exploring local restaurants in and around Austin. Alrighty, Colton, off to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for taking some time out of your day to be here with us and talk through some strategies for managing food costs. Always an exciting topic. Let's take a look at the agenda, kind of get a sense of what it is we are going to talk about today and why we chose tomatoes and why you'll hear me say tomato over and over today. We really want to start with just kind of coming away from this with a full understanding of the life cycle of an ingredient and at what points in that life cycle we can implement strategies in the restaurant to help mitigate food costs from running out of control. How do we get our arms around that and really manage it? We'll talk some strategies of how to build kind of that foundation in your kitchen, in your back of house, in your routines, in your operations that can help us achieve that goal. Talk a little bit about ordering. What are some strategies for ordering to achieve that goal and kind of control food waste? And then also the importance of just knowing where every ounce of your product is going. What processes does it move through? Where might you have some opportunities to be a little more efficient in how you use your ingredients, like tomatoes? And then some strategies overall just to keep costs in check, how to be aware of them, and then how to bring them down when they're too high. So yeah, super excited to get into it. And like she mentioned, there's a Q&A at the bottom, so feel free to throw in your questions, and we'll leave some time at the end to try to talk through those. All right, so where do we start? When we talk about managing food costs in the restaurant, this is a topic that we could probably spend the next 8 hours talking about. There's a lot of different strategies, but really to manage your food costs, it starts by knowing what you have in your restaurant. What have you got? What is in there right now? And to know this, there's a couple different things that we can do. I always like to say that the easiest thing you can do in your kitchens, in your buildings today, is to understand what is coming in that back door, what is coming in terms of your deliveries and your orders, and really honing in on the routines that you have in place with your kitchen staff to check orders in. You want to verify these deliveries. You want to make sure that what you're ordering, what you expect to be coming in, is what you're actually receiving. And so this can be as simple as standing side by side with that delivery driver, checking things off on that copy of the invoice they hand to you, making sure that you're getting the product you ordered, and also the quality of product you ordered, right? Making sure that you're not getting unexpected substitutions, and then identifying those gaps. Did you not receive something that you ordered that is on that invoice that your vendor's expecting you to pay for? And if so, flag that to seek out that credit memo. Engage your vendor rep in that conversation. Hey, I didn't get what I expected, or I didn't get the quality of what I expected. I had to push it back. I had to send it back with the driver. You want to make sure you're getting that money back. Because again, you don't want to see money leaving your restaurant for a product you're not receiving. So that's a lot of times the most obvious space, but in my time in restaurants was the space I saw overlooked the most. So really honing in on those deliveries coming in your door will help you get an idea of what you've got and that the money you are spending is going towards product that is going to be usable and deliver the quality to your guests that you expect. On the flip side of that, though, that vendor relationship is always a two-way street. So you want to make sure that you're a great vendor partner, that you're really partnering with these businesses so that they're willing to kind of go above and beyond for you. And that comes through strategies as easy as just paying invoices on time, right? Setting up some kind of automated invoice capture. A lot of vendors have electronic invoice capabilities now, so they can send that invoice into a system that you're using, so you've got access to that data a lot quicker and can track these things, over time, especially payments and on-time payments to your vendors. Knowing what you've got, there's also an inventory element to this. A lot of different restaurants view inventory counts a little differently, right? Sometimes you're counting when you place orders. Sometimes you're counting weekly. You might be counting monthly. But those counts are important for a bunch of different reasons, and we'll talk about several as we go on here. But one of those is just getting an idea of what you currently have on hand. And this can help in situations where you want to place smarter orders. You don't want to over order and potentially risk waste or spoilage. But there's always that fear of under ordering and not having the product you need to serve your customers and deliver quality plates to tables to guests. So counting is an important part of a lot of what we're going to talk about today, but it really speaks to this idea of just knowing what you have, what is in your restaurant. Now, there's some strategies for counting smarter. That's kind of a very general way of putting it. And so what does that mean in particular? And I think one of the best things that you can do in your restaurant today is ensure that your kitchen is well organized. There's a home for all of your products. Everything is where it needs to live. And to take that a step further, that those things are being rotated as you're counting, as you're going through shelf by shelf, through your walk-in, your dry storage, your cook's line, that the product is where it needs to be. I remember my time in restaurants, it was always difficult to place an accurate order when I knew I had a case in dry storage and a case in the front, and a case on the expo line, and always had this apprehension that maybe I wasn't capturing everything I really had before I placed an order. And that can lead to risks in overspending for a product that you don't really need. So that organization is critical. And again, we'll talk through some more strategies for inventory as we go on here. And finally, knowing what you have is great just from an operational standpoint. Your manager's being aware of what's on the shelf and how much we need to order. But if you can take that information and connect it into some of the analytics that you're looking at or having produced for you, whether that's food cost reporting in the form of an actual versus theoretical report, we'll dig into that in a bit, or just P&L reporting, financial reporting, your food costs. Having that data in your restaurant connected to that reporting can really get you to those insights and those actionable steps a lot quicker. So we talk about receiving orders, why that's important, counting, making sure everything has a home so you can keep your restaurant organized and always be aware of what you already have, not over underspend. Let's talk about ordering just a little bit more though, because there really is an art form to placing good orders with your vendors. And there's a lot of different methods you can take. One of the very best things that you can do in your kitchens, though, and when placing orders, is trying to back up those ordering decisions with some kind of data. I think for a long time in our industry, we've relied on things like ordering PARs, right? These numbers that we come up with that determine how much of a certain product we have to get through the next few days or until I get that next truck order. And PARs are great. That's a fantastic starting point because it starts to really define too much or too little and what that looks like in your restaurant. But I find that there can be some problems with PARs from time to time. So, for example, one of the biggest problems I see is that we never revisit PARs. We don't have a routine or a process to review PARs on a regular basis, whether that's every week, every period, twice a year, whatever that might be. Sometimes those just remain static. And static PARs are what can really get us into trouble because, as we all know, sales volume is going to fluctuate in your building. It depends on what you've got going on around you, the time of year. And the last place you want to be is relying on a PAR that you've configured, but doesn't account for that fluctuation of sales. Great place to start, but you have to revisit these from time to time to make sure that they're still accurate and putting you in a position where you're not overstocking product or understocking product, which are both bad situations to be in. So how do you elevate? How do you get past that level of PARs and what is that next metric, that next approach that you could take? One of the approaches that I am personally a big fan of, that I've used both in restaurants without software, just fancy Excel spreadsheets, and also tools that I've seen in software, are concepts like usage per $1,000, right? So if I do $1,000 in sales, how much of an item am I going to use in that $1,000 in sales? And so you can take advantage of your inventory counts, your purchasing, all of these routines that you try to implement in your restaurant to try to get an idea of how much of a product I'm going to need for a certain sales amount. Improving your order accuracy to keep your kitchen fully stocked. That's what this goes to, right? Really making sure that as you're placing these orders, they're backed by information. Another advantage to doing it this way, I found, is staff turnover. When you have staff inside your kitchen placing orders, when you've got that new bar manager placing new liquor or beer orders, a lot of times they don't have the business background of that restaurant location to make well-informed decisions. And that's not their fault. They're doing the best they can. Maybe they're using established bars. But when you create a system that's based on this historical usage or a metric like usage per $1,000, something similar, you put yourself in a position where you can quickly interchange out people to follow that same process and trust that they are continuing to place accurate orders that are going to serve the needs of the restaurant. I mentioned integrations with vendors before, and I think for a long time, at least even since I was in restaurants, we saw these kind of B2B electronic integrations that were possible through some of the larger vendors that operate out there nationally. And that cohort of vendors that can provide this electronic integration only continues to grow. And specifically, we've seen a very big uptick in supporting electronic purchasing integrations. And there's so many value adds to being able to place orders electronically. Of course, many vendors have had vendor online portals that provide their own tool sets that you should certainly be taking advantage of. But to place your orders through a system that also holds or houses data about your inventory counts, your item movement between locations, waste, to have all of that stuff in one place can really equip you with tools to, again, make data-driven decisions when you're placing orders. And so that's one of the very best places that you can put yourself, is in a position to make use of all of that data in one place and not send your managers running around a bunch of different tools to try to pull all this together to place smart orders. So we titled this the how a tomato, right? The life cycle of a tomato. So where do tomatoes come into all this? We've talked about ordering, making data-driven decisions when you place orders. We've talked about receiving, some strategies that you could implement today to really start to really start wrapping your arms around that. But once that product makes it into your building, what do I need to know about that now, right? That's not the end of its journey. That's really the beginning of its journey. And so I love this graphic so much because at the very top, we have the tomato. This is the thing that's coming into the restaurant. This is the thing we're buying from the vendor. But what we really want to understand as operators is, how does that tomato change as it moves through our kitchen processes and ultimately is delivered to our customers on a plate? And there's a lot of costing considerations through each of these processes that you want to try to keep in mind. So, as an example, you receive this tomato, maybe a case at a certain price point. From there, that tomato may not go straight onto a customer's plate, right? We don't see that very often. It probably undergoes some kind of process like being diced or sliced. And we can see that here in this visual. Anytime your ingredient goes through a process like this, it essentially can be represented as a recipe. Something is happening in the transformation of that item. So in the case of dicing tomatoes, you might be coring that tomato, maybe slicing the ends off. Of course, when you dice, you've got that nice tomato juice that you might be filtering out. So you're encountering some type of loss. And it's understanding that loss and the impact that that has to your profitability that becomes really important. Now, there's two different ways to look at that loss. One is in the sense that if that tomato itself was worth $1, then maybe after I dice that tomato, I'm losing a certain portion of that dollar to waste, right? 20 cents, 30 cents, whatever it might be. And we talk about this a lot when we look at specific processes. What is my yield loss? What's that analysis on this process? And how can I make that more efficient through maybe some better kitchen tools, some more intensive training for my staff, etc. But another way that we really want to think of this is that if I buy a case of 10 pounds of tomatoes and I dice those tomatoes and end up with 8 pounds of diced tomatoes, that final product, that 8 pounds of diced tomatoes, really, in a sense, has the same value as that whole tomato, right? I had to spend the $40 for the case to get those diced tomatoes. So that 8 pounds, that yield, that final result is almost worth $40 in that respect, right? I had to make that spend to achieve that output. And this is a great way to understand the cost impact of these different processes in your kitchen. As I dice the tomatoes, as I put them in maybe new recipes like pico de gallo or salsa, like we see here on the diagram, there's a transformation happening so that by the time that tomato ends up on the plate, we really want to understand the cost it took to put that final product on the plate. And that's what we factor into our plate costing as we try to evaluate our margins and our menu prices and really apply some menu engineering strategies. So understanding this life cycle for all of your ingredients is really where you want to be. Now, doing this type of analysis for every single ingredient in your restaurant, if you've never done it before, can feel overwhelming, right? There's a lot to unpack there. That's really a process. So I like to think of this as more of a journey. And what I would recommend is that you start with those ingredients that you know just inherently are some of your more important items, right? Maybe you're spending the most amount of purchasing dollars on these ingredients. Maybe these are ingredients that are put on your highest selling plates, your most popular dishes. Pick one or two of these ingredients and take a look at this analysis and understand the value of the output in each step of the process. And that'll really help you to understand where your gaps or where your opportunities might be here. Let's talk about a few of those strategies as we look at this information. So as you're going through this process, there's a couple things that make this a little bit easier or will help yield some more meaningful results. So for example, we talked about tracking the true cost of the tomato. How can I do that? And how can I establish a baseline for what that cost should be? Starts by documenting your recipes, right? Now, you can do this in whatever way makes sense, right? It could be in an Excel spreadsheet, it could be in a Word doc, it could be in a PDF, it could be on a cocktail napkin, but you want to write down what your expectation is for each of these processes. If I put this amount of tomatoes into the process, this is what I expect to get out. And sometimes that's something you have to develop in your kitchen as you look at these processes and you look at the quality of ingredients you're getting, you want to establish, hey, on average, this is what we expect to get when we have this input. So I go back to my dicing tomatoes, right? 10 pounds in gives me 8 pounds out. That might be a great baseline. So you can document that. And now that gives you something to measure against, which we'll look at a little bit further here in a moment. Another great thing that you can do in this respect is once you have that baseline, constantly monitor your prep and production in your kitchen to understand how far off that baseline you really are. This can be as simple as a spreadsheet on a clipboard that hangs up on the prep line, right? When you have a certain amount of diced tomatoes that you need to produce each morning or at shift change, whenever that might be, have your line or have your prep cooks get in the habit of writing down what they got out of that, right? Introduce these slowly so that way you can bring your staff around to this idea that you're really trying to achieve an excellent quality of product for your customers, right? And you want to be able to quickly recognize when you're not maybe achieving that goal in some of these processes. It's okay to give them a little bit of ownership over that and help connect that back to the business goals and the customer goals as well. So tracking that prep and production in real time can not only be advantageous to help you measure against that baseline, but it can also feed data into this system that we've mentioned a couple times now, inventory, ordering. All of these data points really give us an excellent lake of information, so to speak, to really make great purchasing, inventory, and menu decisions. And then documenting your recipes really helps you scale operations. So if you're really looking ahead to growth, you're trying to drive consistency across multiple locations, you have to have that documentation to ensure that everybody's on the same page with what it is we're trying to produce. And then as an operator, that can help you make better, well-informed decisions about how to engineer your menu, how to market your menu, and really mitigate the food costs involved in producing these outputs. So once you document your recipes, you're ready to kind of move on to this next step, this next idea, which is I've got all this information. Now I want to spot the gaps. So let's take a look at this next slide here. We talk about some strategies for spotting gaps. At this point, You've really put a lot of effort into your ordering. You've tried to dial that in to respond to sales volumes. You're watching your deliveries. You're seeking credit memos where you need to. You've documented your recipes, arguably one of the most important pieces of this process. Now you have a baseline. You know that when you're selling certain items, when you look at a P mix and you see that you've sold, X number of plates in a day, you now have enough information to get a sense of how much of that product should have been used in the preparation of that dish because you've documented the recipe. You understand what that should have cost you, right? Because you understand the cost of those ingredients used in preparing those plates. So now you can take this baseline, this what should I have used? We often call that a theoretical usage or a theoretical cost, even. And you can compare that to what actually left your restaurant. If you know what you're bringing in via your deliveries, what you're ordering, you're taking some regular inventory counts to kind of get those snapshots in time of what you have on the shelf at the end of every week or the end of every period, you have enough information to calculate your actual food cost, right? And that's just your beginning inventory plus your purchases minus your ending inventory, right? That's generally what that cost is. And so you can take these two metrics now, look at them side by side, and say, okay, well, over the prior period, I see that I actually used 100 pounds of these heirloom tomatoes, right? These tomatoes left my building in one form or another, but I should have only used 80 pounds of these tomatoes based on what I sold and these recipes I've documented. So now you can look at that gap and understand a couple of things. First off, you can understand the obvious, you're just missing those tomatoes, right? You have to go figure out where those are. But you can also understand the monetary, the financial impact for those tomatoes, right? You are now inefficient in your use of those tomatoes, and you want to try to determine why that is because you're pouring more money into it than you need to be. And so, where is that gap? And this is where you can employ strategies like logging waste. So, maybe shiftly or daily, logging wasted products, spoilage, breakage, these kinds of things that can better help explain that gap you might have between actual and this theoretical usage. I also find being able to connect that variance to dollars can be very impactful for store level teams and for staff members because to hear that I'm missing 10 pounds of tomatoes might register that there's a gap there and we can take better ownership over that. But to understand that that 10 pounds translates to 11, $12, whatever that might be, that tells a slightly different story, right? Because now I can see the monetary impact, the financial impact, and that can help lend a different sense of urgency. It can also help you identify the items that, if addressed, will have the biggest ROI for your business. I might be missing, 100 ounces of leaf lettuce, but I may also be missing 100 ounces of flank steak beef, right? So which one in terms of my business impact do I want to lend my focus to? Well, that's where we can look at the dollars in terms of the variance and say, okay, maybe that flank steak beef, that's where I want to pour my attention to because that's where I'm going to get the greatest return back to my business if I can narrow the existing gaps that exist there. Now, there's also some strategies in the kitchens that you can employ, behind your bars that you can employ in terms of portioning. When you have those well documented recipes, now you can explore some tools or some training in these areas to better help you achieve that standard. Whether that's just additional training for your staff, maybe it's new tools that you need on your line, for example. So well-defined scoops or ladles, or maybe even pre-portioning parts of your menu that don't sacrifice quality but allow you to ensure that consistency from plate to plate. So these are kind of the areas that you can start digging into when you have these baselines in this data to work from. And once you do that, you start to see oftentimes it doesn't even take a full quarter. When you're zeroed in and laser focused on a specific gap in your restaurant, and you're really putting attention into that, documenting those recipes, leveraging this information, you can start to see a return on investment of that effort relatively quickly. I've seen food costs improve by 1 or 2% over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, just by digging into a specific item, having that focus, and really doing what we can to improve those gaps. So there's a lot to unpack here. There are a lot of different things that we can do with these strategies in our buildings to keep costs in check. And one of the most important things I think out of all of this is understanding those product life cycles. From the moment that order is placed, am I getting what I ordered? Am I getting the quality of product? Does that product have a home in my restaurant? Is it a part of a regular inventory count to help build that awareness and always knowing what I have? And then are my recipes documented? Do I know what my baseline is? Do I understand what it is I'm trying to achieve from plate to plate, from prep recipe to prep recipe? And then measuring your results against that baseline. These are critical parts of this process. Now, anytime I talk to folks like this, I always want to make sure that you're able to leave with just a practical next step. What is something I can walk into my kitchen today and start doing? And there's a bunch of different places we could start. I think for me, one of the easiest things, I mentioned it earlier, is just monitoring those deliveries. When things come into my building, am I getting what I ordered? Is there any money that I'm leaving on the table by just not getting product? You'd be surprised how often that happens. Am I seeking those credit memos? So I think that's a really good strategy that you could employ. Another strategy that you can employ is the smart ordering, right? We talked about ordering by data-driven decisions and taking a second look at our PARs and our processes for establishing how much product we need. I've heard many of you have probably heard the same truism, but it's really hard to waste or spoil food that you never ordered in the first place, right? And so that's a mantra that we can carry into the restaurant and really try to take a second look at what those procedures look like. So lots of actionable steps here, but I think those are really good places to start. And then picking that ingredient, picking that thing that if you could just save a few dollars here and there would really make a meaningful impact to your P&L, to your food costs, can really go a long way. And you start that journey and then you add items from there until you've got your hands around the items you keep in your restaurant and the recipes that you're producing. So always know what's on hand, what it's costing you, and where it's used, right? Seems like three basic tenets of the approach, but we know those are each in and of themselves big rabbit holes to dive down into. So identify where you can start, where you might be weak, and get that laser focus on those strategies. And that'll give you the insights that you need to not only understand where you're at with food costs today, but maybe some opportunities you have to better mitigate and control those food costs moving forward. And that puts you in a position to scale, whether that means multiple locations, more locations, or even just scaling the business you have in your independent location, right? How do I bring more people through the door? How do I ensure my guests get a consistent experience? And how do I do all this with great margins and put myself in a position to pay my people well and cover the P&L without worrying about food costs kind of spiraling out of control. So key takeaways, stronger back of house foundation, right? We talked about some processes we can implement in the kitchen, both in terms of ordering, inventorying, recipes. Order smarter to waste less. I think there should be a preposition there, right? Order smarter to waste less. Consistent ordering, reliable receiving. That'll put you in a position where you're not shorting your customers, but you're not running into spoilage. Prep with precision, right? That's a documented recipes, understanding what our baseline is, and then knowing where every ounce goes. Do you have a full understanding of the kind of that product life cycle for your items and where your most valuable processes are throughout those life cycles? So definitely key takeaways here and hopefully some meaningful strategies you can take back into your restaurants moving forward.
Thank you so much, Colton. We really appreciate it. Before we get started with the Q&A, we have a quick poll question here. It should be at the top of your screen now. I'll give everybody another minute. Great. Thank you all so much. So let's get started here with the Q&A. Are you ready, Colton?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, let's get this started. So first question, how can I start to calculate usage per $1,000 in sales for my inventory items?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is a big rabbit hole you can get into, but I think it starts by you want to calculate your actual usage of an item over a period of time. So this means you've counted the item fairly regularly. You understand how much of that item you've purchased over a period of time, and that gives you just the bare minimum information you need to get that actual usage that I talked about earlier. So I like to think that, our software uses a 90-day window. It's a pretty wide window. But even if you just had a period's worth of data, right? You take an inventory count here at the end of August, you take another inventory count of that item at the end of September. What you can do is use that along with your purchases to get an actual usage for the period and then compare that to your sales. So again, you could do this on any time frame, week to week, period to period. But when you are able to get that actual usage compared to your total sales, then that's how you can get that usage per 1,000 and incorporate that into your ordering procedures. So it starts with counting and it starts with tracking your orders. And with those two pieces of information, you can start to deduce that usage metric.
Okay, great. Next question. If we use PARs to place our orders, how often should we update them?
Yeah, fantastic question. I think there is a fine line there because when you're placing an order and you walk into the walk-in and you're out of a product, that may not necessarily mean that you need to immediately bump that par up. Or on the other side of that, if you walk into your dry storage area and you've got 12 cases left, when you're ready to place a new order, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to immediately drop that down, except for maybe in crazy circumstances. But what you want to do is try to monitor that. And so whether that's logging it on your paper order guide or making a note in your manager logbook around it, you want to make a note of these kind of situations where you think the par might need to be adjusted. And then I would say every 2 to 4 weeks, right? At least bare minimum, once a period, reevaluating your pars, maybe reviewing some of the notes you've had when placing orders, and trying to tick that down once by a case or tick it up by a case. So try not to make drastic decisions. Always incorporate sales volume, kind of what happened the last week, what happened in that period, and then ask yourself if that necessitates a par adjustment. I think the key takeaway here is just make sure you're revisiting them in some capacity. Don't leave them static for months on end because that's what can get you into trouble.
Got it. Okay, next question. What's the best report to show price variance on items if we wanted to look at the previous 3 months to see a high and low cost for items?
Yeah, great question. We actually have a report in our software called Item Price Change Analysis. Item Price Change Analysis. And that lets you pick a beginning date and an ending date, and even lets you filter to certain categories or items of your inventory. And what that'll do is for each of your locations, if you have multiple stores, it'll give you exactly that data. It'll show you kind of what the price was coming into that period and what the average price you paid over that time frame was, and we'll even let you drill down to get some details like the highest price, the lowest price. But what I really love about that report is it shows you the cost of goods sold impact to those price changes. So if you have items that have fluctuated wildly over the course of that time frame, you get a sense of what kind of impact that had to your cost of goods, whether a positive or a negative impact, and then get some details about the individual transactions, the individual invoices, so you can go ask some follow-up questions with your vendors and maybe identify better ways to get that product without dealing with those fluctuations. So yeah, item price change analysis. So it's one of my favorite reports.
Great. Next question. How important is it to count weekly versus monthly for AVT reports?
Yeah, that is a great question. I'm so glad that that was asked. We've actually looked at data that shows us that restaurants that are counting weekly as opposed to monthly um, does result in a lower food cost. And I think it largely comes from that awareness on hand. Now, when it comes to reviewing the AVT report, I would echo that process. I think weekly is ideal. Weekly puts you in a position where you're counting and reviewing AVT often enough to catch issues quickly. You don't want to be in a position where you're reviewing last period's P&L, see a high food cost, but now it's too late to react to that. So the AVT report can put you in a position where you can catch issues before the end of the period or before they really make a kind of a compounding impact to your food cost and P&L. And so I think weekly is a good balance there. I've seen some groups that'll kind of do subsets of the inventory, maybe 5 to 10 items they count daily. Sometimes that can be a little too much overhead on the operators. But also, I think monthly doesn't give you that lead time to react to problems that start to develop in the middle of a period. So, yeah, I'd go with weekly as much as you can. But if you're not doing anything right now, starting monthly is a great starting point, and then you can grow into that.
Great. Okay, last question here. Is it possible to assign PARs in R365?
Yeah, it is. So in our purchase order tools, when you create an order template, so that's the vernacular we use in the platform. I like to think of the order templates as kind of your order guide, right? What are the items you're ordering from each vendor? There is a spot there where you can set those static pars for an item, and that's per the unit of measure you're ordering from your vendor. So whether the vendor's providing you a case of product, a bag of product, a box, whatever it might be, you can establish that par and then use that to inform your ordering decisions. And we've got some great documentation in our support center that dives into detail about that a little bit more. It'd be a good place to find some more information.
Great. Okay, thank you so much, Colton. Again, we really appreciate it. And before we sign off here, we wanted to let you all know that the restaurant transformation tour schedule is still live. We'll be making stops in San Diego and New York before the end of the year. These events will feature sessions tailored to different roles in the restaurant industry, offering valuable insights and the chance to connect with peers. We really hope to see you there. And this now concludes our webinar. You'll receive an email with a link to download the recording, to listen again, or share with your colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you again soon.